wanted to talk a little bit about a book I just finished by a person I'd kind of been interested in by way of an author I just read, Stephen Fry, who's a big fan of this individual, or this particular individual, is Oscar Wilde, and the book in question is The Picture of Dorian Gray. It's kind of this, it's written in the 19th century. It's an old book, and you can very easily tell that just by reading it. It's a lot of verbosity and kind of dead words, I would say. But it's an interesting read, and it's kind of the outline, the following of a man who is kind of ends up becoming enamored with his youth, and he's kind of this very beautiful and kind of magnetic. He has a magnetism about him, and he doesn't really know that in the beginning of the story, and it opens up with him sitting in as a subject for a painter named Basil Hallward, who's a friend of his. And Basil has this friend named Lord Henry Ashton, often called Harry in the book, and Harry is a very hedonistic man, a very his idea of the chief purposes in life, what he thinks are the most important. Really, he uses the word sensations a lot, and passion. He thinks that the pursuit of one's passions and sensations are kind of the premier goal when it comes to existence, or leading a happy life, or a fulfilled life. And he kind of exists to him and Dorian start talking. They become friends, pretty good friends. And so they're talking frequently, and Lord Henry Ashton is very much a sophist. He takes part in much sophistry. He has a very eloquent and articulate way of speaking. And when that's the case, which is, the entire point of sophistry is not necessarily to be right, but to convince other people that you are right by means of your eloquent ability to argue, or your ability to get your point across. Because they're not really arguing a whole lot. It's mostly just Harry preaching at Dorian. He always has an answer for everything. He's very contrarian, and he's very articulate, but he's very intelligent, and he's a good sophist. That's all. The way that I can think to say it is he knows how to get his worldview across in a way where you're gonna go, oh, that makes sense. I think I might try that. And that's actually what Dorian Gray does. He kind of falls in love with the worldview that Harry is espousing to him, and he undertakes it. He begins living in such a manner. And another important part, really the central thing happening in the story, is Basil Hallward. He's a painter. I don't know if I mentioned that. And this kind of final portrait that he does of Dorian Gray, that Dorian's sitting on, he considers to be his masterpiece. It's kind of a beautiful expression of youth and beauty, and a beautiful portrait of Dorian Gray, and everyone thinks so, everyone who's exposed to it, which is not a whole lot of people, but Harry and Dorian and Basil. And so he has this great portrait of himself that Basil has done, and he takes it home. Basil gives it to him, and he, after meeting Lord Henry, and after having talked to Lord Henry, he goes home one night, and he's thinking about his youth, and he's essentially praying, and he wishes very intently, and that his youth could live on in this portrait, as opposed to himself growing older. He wishes for the portrait to age and not him. And in great fictional fashion, this happens to happen. This is what happens. The portrait starts to grow old, and not him, but even more interestingly, the portrait seems to undertake and change based on the I guess what you would call the immoral, or the moralistic decisions that Dorian is making. So if Dorian does something that is particularly nasty, or anything of the sort, that the portrait kind of, it changes and it takes on this new form. So one example of this is when there's a woman that Dorian initially falls in love with, named Sybil Vane. She's an actress, and Dorian is very much enamored with her acting and her beauty, and he falls in love with her. And then when she learns that he is in love with her, it's kind of this weird thing. I don't know, it might have made more sense in the 19th century, I have no clue, but she finds that he's in love with her, and she's an actress in this kind of middling theater. It's not, everyone else kind of sucks at acting, and it's not really they're not really well done productions. But she is competent, and she's a good actor, and Dorian notices this, and they start courting each other, and she learns of this, and she knows that Dorian's going to be in the crowd. And then one night, after she has learned of Dorian's love, when Dorian has brought Basil and Harry along with him, she purposefully does not act well. She decides that acting, she's kind of become disenchanted with acting, because she's fallen in love. She feels that now that she knows love, and she's kind of playing all these traditionally, I guess, well, these characters in kind of the old romantic plays, like Romeo and Juliet and Hamlet and things like that. And she's playing all these women who are not feigning love, but acting as if they're in love. She's playing characters who are experiencing love, and she feels that when she's actually in love, she doesn't feel the need to do that anymore. She doesn't want to do that anymore, and so she kind of what would a good analogy? She takes a knee. She flubs the show on purpose, because it's not what she wants to do, and she tells that to Dorian, but Dorian is not necessarily, he doesn't really accept that answer, and he very violently and meanfully, it was not a good scene. She tells him this, and he goes, I thought I loved you, but I don't. I actually hate you. He's very childish about the whole thing, and essentially destroys her, or destroys any idea of love that existed in her head. And it's a pretty harrowing scene. Anyway, he does that, feels some regret about it as he goes home, but ultimately kind of comes to the decision that he was in the right, as cavalier and non-deep youth tend to do. They tend to think that they're always right. He just doesn't think about it enough, and but he is regretful and sorrowful. So he is undertaken, or he's decided that he's going to apologize to her. And before he has the chance to do so, the next day Harry comes around to tell him that Sybil Vane has committed suicide. And so, I mean, it seems pretty clear that the reason, and it's a fictional novel, so clearly the reason was because Dorian shunned her in such a violent manner, in such an undelicate way. And that happens, and Dorian starts to notice, or something happens to draw it back to the portrait. The portrait actually changes it's his facial expression changes. The way the book describes it is his mouth takes on this curve of sinisterness, of kind of evil. There are lines of evil kind of outlining his lips, and it's essentially alluding to the fact that he has committed this act of kind of unsympathy, of selfishness, of undue selfishness. And so his portrait is kind of taking that on for him, and I think in a metaphorical sense, kind of allowing him to exist still. It's taking the weight of that kind of bad decision off of him onto itself, and allowing him to not really care about it, to not give it much thought, to kind of brush it under a rug, and continue living in the in kind of the hedonistic and shallow existence that he has prescribed to himself. And there are a number of happenings similar to this throughout the book. Dorian kind of goes from being this very celebrated and respected and handsome young man to kind of a reviled and not necessarily unpopular, but he's losing his respect because of his immoral and ignoble decisions that he's deciding to undertake in the pursuit of passion and sensation. The word sensation comes up a lot in the book, especially out of the mouths of people like Dorian and Harry. They talk a lot about pursuing sensations, and that kind of being the ultimate goal of what life should be. And I think that's kind of a hollow worldview, and it ends up being so. Dorian, he's going through life. He's kind of, there's this one chapter in particular, and this book is almost feels more like a play, like a script, than although a very descript script. There's a lot of it's not all dialogue. There's a lot of kind of prose as well, but it's not as linear as you would expect a fictional novel to be. It kind of jumps around. It covers a span of, I think it's about 20 years in 160 pages, and they're just kind of jumping around. Oscar Wilde is spending more time on certain parts of his life and less time on others, which is, that can be expected. I guess it all depends on who you're reading and what book it is, but it feels kind of like a play, and then it jumps from act to act. And thinking about it, I guess that's kind of what all books do, but some are more linear than others, and this one feels a little bit more delineated than other books that I've read. But there is one chapter in the book where it's purely a description of Dorian's material pursuits and his kind of eventual disillusionment with all of them. He's at one point very interested in tapestry and jewels and world music, like musical instruments and things like that. And he eventually kind of realizes that all these things he doesn't realize that they're not actually important. He just kind of becomes bored with them and moves on to the next thing. And it kind of seems to be a metaphor for the actual way in which he's conducting himself in all things in his life, with his friends and his acquaintances and things like that. And Chopin on in the background as well. He's very energetic right now. And I put that on for a reason. Chopin is Dorian's actually a trained musician, and he played Chopin a couple times, nocturnes in particular, which is what this is a Rubinstein recording of Chopin's nocturnes. But anyway, yeah. So you're kind of going through this story, and there's another really interesting chapter that outlines kind of one of the reasons why Dorian starts to become a shunned individual within his social circles. Is he starts to peruse kind of the wrong side of the tracks, kind of areas of ill repute within London. He's visiting opium dens and things like that. And I think one of the most true and vivid chapters is Dorian is kind of at a lower point in his life. I think he's just starting to realize his disillusionment with what he's done, and he's also committed some extremely evil and violent acts, one of which being the murder of his friend Basil, which feels like a big step to just kind of step over. But he essentially, Basil, I'll go ahead and outline that really quickly. Basil kind of comes to him and tells him all the things that he's hearing about him, and talks to him about how he thinks he's kind of choosing the wrong path in life. He's doing the wrong things, and in that Dorian becomes very upset and impatient, and he kind of, in a fit of rage, he takes Basil up to the room where he's locked away this portrait that's kind of evolving instead of him, and he shows it to Basil, and it kind of shows Basil what his friend has become, which is really this kind of evil and hollow man who doesn't really embody any of the choices that he's made. He kind of is I don't know. He's almost nothing. He's just his youth. He's just his impertinent and superfluous youth, which has really no use to the world. It just has only use for itself. And I think that's I'm gonna go on a tangent here, but I think that's kind of the ultimate crux of this book, is the danger. Well, there's just the stupidity of expecting permanent youth, because youth is only good for itself, and not necessarily youth, but the ideas that come along with youth, the hubris and the arrogance and the inability to think of larger things than yourself and of others is kind of, that's what Dorian embodies, and that's ultimately what leads him to become such a hollow and kind of dangerous man. Because after Basil sees this portrait, he starts accosting and berating Dorian even more. He's like, "What have you done? Like, what are you? Like, well, he goes, we are friends, like, but you are just becoming this terrible person." And that's essentially, it's long and it's a tirade, but Basil's going through all this, and Dorian's becoming more and more angry, and kind of Basil says something. I should have highlighted it or wrote it down, but he says one singular thing, and that kind of sets off Dorian, and he grabs a knife and he stabs Basil to death. And it's it's kind of it seems to be kind of the culmination of his character, that character, at least, in that he is becoming, that character that he has pursued ever since he decided that hedonism and impulse and passion and sensation is going to be his MO, his modus operandi. So he does that, and then from that, a few chapters down the road, it outlines this trip that he takes to this area of ill repute in London, which is home to many opium dens. It kind of highlights this trip that he takes there, and it's just a very descriptive and accurate look into the life of a drug addict, of drug culture. And I think even more accurate of description of, and I'm not of any aristocracy or anything like that. I don't pretend to know exactly what this would be like, but the feelings that he is feeling as he's doing this just seem very, very real. He understands that this is not, and this kind of applies to anyone who is an addict or does drugs. He understands that this is not where he should be, that he doesn't want to partake in opium consumption, which is heroin essentially, but he feels this strong need to, because heroin provides you with this, and really many drugs provide you with this sense of ease. They kind of lift your burdens, and that almost makes them sound more benevolent than they are. They don't necessarily lift them; they make you forget about them, and kind of take you to this place of it is of euphoria, and that's not euphoria in any positive sense. It's just kind of the description of what it's actually doing. And so that's a really interesting, good chapter. And another thing that happens in that chapter is Dorian is confronted by the brother of Sybil Vane, his first kind of love affair. And this man's James Vane has sworn to hurt Dorian if he were ever to hurt Sybil, and Dorian kind of hurt her in the most flagrant way. So James finds him outside one of these opium dens, and he is going to kill him, but because about, I think, 18 years have passed at this point, Dorian says, "I can't possibly be the man that you're looking for, because I am this young, beautiful man, which I was 18 years ago, but now that 18 years have passed, I would be older now." And since his age is being given to this portrait, as opposed to him taking it on himself, he is still a youthful looking man. And so James goes, "Oh shoot, sorry, I was gonna shoot you, but never mind, wrong person, whoops." And so then James, Dorian runs away, gets away, and this woman that Dorian had known before 18 years in the past comes out of one of the opium dens, and that's also kind of an allusion to the effect that Dorian has on his friends and his the individuals that he associates with. Is this woman is in an opium den, and it's actually she comes up to Dorian while he's in the opium den, and it's not really described that they are familiar with each other, but she says something or other, and is badgering Dorian and some individual that he's talking to at the moment, and he gives her some money, and it's not really clear why. It just seems like he kind of wants her to go away, and so and she does, and then she reappears outside of the opium den, and is talking to James, and says, he says, "Oh, I thought that was Dorian Gray, because somebody called him Prince Charming, which was a nickname that Sybil gave to him." And she goes, that was Dorian Gray. And he's like, "Oh, no way." But she convinces him, because she knows him and had known him 18 years ago. And it alludes to the fact that Dorian is kind of a negative force on his friends. He's a vacuous entity who doesn't necessarily bring good where he goes. He's kind of a harbinger. I think that's how you say. I've only seen that word written down. Harbinger of ill fate. Where he goes, good does not follow. And so he, that's kind of, I think this is where you start to see Dorian Gray getting really fearful of death, and of also the things that he's done. I think this shock of being confronted with a mistake that he made in the past has kind of has jarred his mind, and kind of pushed him back into reality, and he is start to become some more introspective and think about the things that he's done, and from there things are kind of going downhill for him. He's constantly in a state of nervousness and fear, and there's the book kind of continues on a little. I don't want to say tediously, because it's a great book. It's written very well, but it just kind of goes through these final moments of fear and trepidation that Dorian is feeling. And one second, I'm going to turn over the record. Yes. Okay. Hang on. Creek bump. More Chopin. And so it's kind of exploring these final moments of kind of the death throes of Dorian's hedonistic worldview, and he's also espousing these thoughts that he's having to Lord Henry Ashton in classic Ashton fashion. He's contrarian. He's not understanding. He's saying he's a sophist about it. He's not interested in helping Dorian become a better person, which is kind of this final idea that Dorian arrives upon, is that he's not been a good person and that he needs to change his ways and seek to do good. And in classic sophist fashion, Lord Henry Ashton is kind of like what is good? Sensation is good. Impulse is good. The things that make you feel good are clearly good because that's what they do. It's literally in the name. Why would it be any other way? He's in that way. I think that Lord Ashton is really kind of the to the extent that this book has an antagonist. It's not necessarily set up in the classic protagonist antagonist fashion. Dorian is very antagonistic. Doesn't have a lot of characteristics of a protagonist. But I would say that if you had to label it in a way, I think Lord Henry Ashton is kind of the personification of evil, of bad within the book. If you kind of break down books in that way, where there are elements of good and elements of bad and evil, Lord Henry Ashton is kind of this he's devilish. He's handsome. He's articulate, and he can explain to you why being evil is good. And even I am not totally ready to say that either party is particularly evil, although they certainly did undertake an evil act, especially Dorian, who murdered his friend. I don't know if I'm ready to do that, but I think if you put Lord Henry Ashton in one corner and someone like Basil Hallward in another corner, who is I think actually a force for good within the book, one side comes out looking better than the other. Henry is not. I don't think he's someone to emulate, and that's another interesting thing about sophistry and kind of these people who are very articulate. I was once watching this thing that my mom was watching, Mind Hunters, which is like a series on Netflix about it's kind of a la Criminal Minds. It's kind of about these people who study psychopathic behavior and seek to understand it so that they can then weed out other psychopaths and stop serial killers and things like that. And there's this one interview that they were doing with Charlie Manson. I think that's the murderer. I always get Marilyn Manson, Charlie Manson, all those people mixed up. I think Charlie Manson was the killer, or technically he never killed anyone. And this is me. Charlie Manson was the cult leader, the leader of the Manson family who committed a bunch of murders. And even that tiny little Charlie Manson is not a murderer is I think a remnant of this scene where Charlie Manson is incredibly charismatic and articulate, and I think the entire point of that scene is almost to make you go, some of the stuff that Charlie Manson said kind of makes sense, and it's to show you that it's not always, it's these things that people do that you think are crazy and weird. They believe it because they are probably incredibly smart and incredibly good at convincing not just themselves but other people that their worldview is correct. That's kind of it's sophistry. It's the entire idea of of Lord Henry Ashton, of cult leaders, of certain religious individuals. I don't necessarily want to bring religion into this, because I don't think religion is at its heart. I don't think that religion is at its heart entirely is entirely sophistry, but I think if you get into certain talks of the church and things like that, I don't necessarily have a problem with. I have more of a problem with certain churches than I have with the entire macro structure of religion, and that's all I'll go down there. But the entire point is Lord Henry Ashton is the antagonist, I think, in this book, and he's a very debonair and articulate, and sometimes you sometimes tend to agree with him, but I think that's kind of the point of the book is to outline that. Well, there are multiple points in the book. It's about youth and decay and ignoble actions and 19th century British aristocracy and just hypocritism and things like that. But I think one of the points of the book is also the danger of an articulate individual. Jordan Peterson talks about this. He talks about as you should be dangerous in that you can articulate your worldview and be confident in it in the way that you can convince others of it, because in that way but that has a flip side, and there's a reason that he uses the word dangerous, because if you are espousing dangerous ideas and you're good at that, then you can convince people of a lot of things. And I think that's one of the more important parts of the book. And so Harry is talking to Dorian, kind of talking about how he thinks he's being a little ridiculous. Like, why would you ever forsake the world of hedonism and pleasure for morality and ethicalness? And Dorian is kind of upset with that. And in the final chapter of the book, Dorian goes home. He's kind of looking at his portrait, which is now like entirely withered and corrupted, and it has blood-stained hands, and it's wrinkled, and the facial expression is evil, and it's taken on all of the age and immorality of its subject, Dorian Gray. And Dorian he decides to kill it, to destroy it. I use the word kill because this portrait almost seems living, but he decides to destroy the portrait. And his final action, and really the end of the story, is Dorian takes the knife that he used to kill Basil, and he stabs the portrait, and in an interesting turn of events that I'm not totally sure I've fully understood. Dorian ends up dying, and their places are switched. As soon as Dorian destroys the portrait, he becomes the portrait. He becomes wrinkled. His dead body is now this wrinkled figure that was in the portrait, and the portrait becomes the perfect kind of personification of youth that he was. And I think this is kind of, I would hazard a guess that it is the final judgment of a life so full of ignoble and immoral actions is death in this sense. It's almost his repentance. And he talks about, he has an inner monologue about this, about how if he were to confess for his crimes, his sins, he feels that the the logical form of punishment would be death. And he kind of talks himself out of that, but he's like, nah, I can't. I don't want to confess, but I can destroy this picture that has haunted me and possibly even cursed me ever since it started taking on my age and my decisions. And so I think it's almost an answer to that inner monologue question that he had, which is death my proper end? And obviously it's everyone's proper end, but is death my proper punishment? And because I have become this hollow, immoral man, and I've committed great acts of evil and allowed those acts of evil to away from me, to live, to not think about them. I've not allowed the bad things that I've done to change me, to the point where I've destroyed lives, not just reputations and relationships, but also killed people. Another consequence of his killing of Basil Howard is he kind of blackmails this old friend that he has, who's a chemist, to destroy all the evidence except for the knife, coincidentally, because he has to use it in the end to stab the picture. It's full circle. But he does have him destroy the body, and originally this man, Alan, I think his name, Campbell, his last name is definitely Campbell. It might be Alan Campbell. I don't remember his full name. It might be wrong, but he blackmails him into destroying the body, and he's hesitant at first, and then eventually, once he puts the blackmail on the table, the guy's like, well, I don't really have any other choice. So this man destroys the body and eventually ends up killing himself, and that's just more blood that is upon Dorian Gray's, as described in the book, slight and well-figured hands. But yeah, it's a really great story. It's old but timeless, because the pursuit of youth is something that everyone, I think, struggles with. Youth is alluring and passionate and attractive, and I think everyone wants. It's a hard thing to lose, because nobody wants to. I don't want to say nobody wants to grow old. I think in the abstract, people want to grow old, but they want the benefits of age, like wisdom and humility and security in yourself. As they want their cake and they want to eat it too. They want to hold on to their youth while becoming greater, and it's just not the reality of life and of growing old. So yeah, this is a really good story. It's not often that I read these stories and remember so much, and I actually find that I forget a lot of the books that I read, and it's the good books that I remember a lot about. Yeah, and this one, Lord of, like, I'm finding that there are some books that I read for entertainment almost purposefully. I would say that satire falls into this, but I don't often remember a lot about satire. Partly because it's just so strange, and the storytelling structure can be so disjointed and weird, and the things that the authors focus on are less not necessarily descriptive, but they don't paint that picture unless you're of a satirical mindset. Whereas something like The Picture of Dorian Gray, or Lord of the Rings, or they spend an immense amount of time painting the entire picture of what's going on, the emotions, the physical landscape, and it can seem tedious at the time. There are a lot of parts in the book where I was like, oh God. Like the entire chapter where they're talking about Dorian's pursuits, like his musical and bejeweled and tapestrical, when he starts becoming interested in all these physical things like tapestries and jewels and music and things like that. And it almost feels like Genesis 1:1, where it's just this giant genealogy, this giant list of well, not just Genesis 1:1, but the entire book of Genesis. It's just this list of things, of people, of genealogies, and that's not what the list in the Picture of Dorian Gray necessarily is about, but it's a list of jewels and who has jewels and things like that. It has this moment of tediousness, this chapter of tediousness, but there's something about it that's powerful, and maybe it's just to kind of outline the depths of his wish to project his life into the material, to live in the material world, as opposed to the immaterial world that kind of comes along with being moral and good, and it harks on the idea that, you know, materialism is not making anybody happy, and I think people have known that, and that idea has been fleshed out quite fully for the last God knows how many years. Many years. At the very least, since The Picture of Dorian Gray, which is a great book, and I would recommend anybody check that out, because I think it's an important story. And Oscar Wilde, I think, was a really interesting person. The book was very shunned and it's criticized in its time, because the idea was, people thought that it celebrated kind of debauchery and hedonism and things like that in a world and in a time where things like that were not celebrated in the slightest. And actually, I think I might have misspoke. Is it 19th century or 18th century? Moment. I don't know. Doesn't say. It's not listed. I guess I could Google it. I am sitting in front of a computer. Stand by. This is gonna bug me. The Picture of Dorian Gray. Publishing date. This is 1890. Oh. So it's barely 19th century. Almost 20th century. There's no way that's true. Hang on. Whatever. It doesn't matter. If you want to figure it out, you can figure it out. 1890. I think that's right. Don't know. Yes. Going with it. 19th century. But yes, people thought that it kind of celebrated these things. And I think a more in-depth and analytical reading of the book leads you to the conclusion that it's certainly not celebrating these things. It's outlining the flaws and poking holes in that worldview. I mean, the person who fully embodies that worldview ends up dead, kind of by his own hand. He ends up, I don't see how someone could read it and go, oh. And maybe it's just because Lord Henry and even Dorian at points are so articulate and so eloquent about these ideas. They are convincing. They seem convincing. They go on these long tirades where they make somewhat seemingly cogent points about the nature of sensation and impulse and belief and faith and being good and what that entails. And yeah, I don't. Maybe people in 1890 were just kind of dumb, or they were looking for an excuse to be hedonistic. And people about it. I'm not going to speculate on the ideas and emotions of our primitive ancestors, They were probably pretty dumb. But that's that. This is a long video. I really liked this book, though. That's why I could talk about it forever. It's a really good story. And Chopin is a great. Check out his. I feel weird telling people to check out Chopin because he's been around for like 150 years or whatever. But if you're not hip to him, get hip because he's good. It's Saturday. Wait, no, it's Friday. And then tomorrow's Saturday, and then the next day's Sunday. So have a good rest of your week, good weekend, and a good rest of ever. And I will catch you later. Don't hold on to your youth. Embrace age.